Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a YouTube video podcast where we explore all things cinema. And I want to welcome back to the show Matt Page, who is a UK-based film historian, writer, and independent scholar who has been researching adaptations of the Bible in film for over 20 years. He has contributed to a variety of books and journals on the subject and runs the popular Bible Films blog, biblefilms.blogspot.com. He was here last year discussing his book, 100 Bible Films, which the BFI published, which is a fantastic book. So, Matt, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's good to be back, Robert. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. I said no. I just saw your cat jump up there. So
yeah, she's been asleep all afternoon, and now she's suddenly decided now's the time to get active. So
perfect. Well, what a perfect film to wake up a cat is. Is Salo. Salo, for people who haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while. Although I think it's a film that's hard to forget. I'll just read a little brief synopsis. It's in World War II Italy. 4 fascist libertines round up 9 adolescent boys and girls and subject them to 120 days of physical, mental, and sexual torture, to say the least. I'll save my my experience of watching this for the first time a couple of days ago. I'm curious first, what drew you to, because I know that you saw I put a Facebook status a little while ago saying, I think I'm ready to watch Salo, because I love Pasolini, but I've never been able to face this movie. I'd seen clips of it and I thought, oh God, I don't know if I could face it. So what was it that thought, you'd want to jump on my show and talk about it? What is it about this film?
Well, I think I just find Pasolini a fascinating artist, really. And he was one of those guys that, he's known most famously these days for his film career, but he kind of, by the time he made his first film in 1961, Acatone. Yeah. But by the time he'd done that, he'd already been kind of, been being published as a poet for 15 years. He was a kind of a critic as well. He did, painting and sculpture and various other things. So he really was this kind of broader artist. And it was sorry, I missed out the fact that he was also a novelist. Right. And really for him, it was very much about choosing an artistic medium that suited the subject he wanted to explore. I've known about his work for about 20 odd years. I think I first watched Gospel According to St. Matthew. And was kind of really interested by that film, and also La Dakota, which these both kind of tie in with the book a bit more. But and then just was then just kind of drawn in by the whole story. That even his interest in that in that film is just a kind of really fascinating combination of themes going on. You've got this kind of Catholic side to him, this Marxist side to him, this atheist side to him, and just all these things that kind of come together in a bundle of kind of interesting contradictions and things, and the sense that he's really working with issues in his cinema and trying to explore stuff in his cinema. And so as I've kind of got to watch all of his films, including I think there's maybe one I haven't seen, but including his kind of documentaries and his shorts and some of these other things. Just really getting a real appreciation of just all the different elements of him as an artist, and how he pushes against his boundaries, and no more so is that evident than in this film, I suppose. But also consistently doing different things, consistently refusing to fit into boxes, and consistently just having this overwhelming passion just to express himself and to explore issues. So he's a fascinating guy. You never know where you are with him, and he produces. I guess what I love in films is when it's films that don't just give you everything, give you things in a nicely wrapped answer. That you come away. Almost, I think the contradictions for me are always just fascinating, or things you can't quite work out, and spend days trying to figure out afterwards. And that was very much his bag, and so I think that's why he's up there with my most favorite filmmakers.
Yes, because I mean his work requires so much thought, like I think of like the best films do, but at the same time they don't, well maybe a couple of them do, but this one in particular, it, even though he's using metaphors and it's there's intellectual things to think about, it's a deeply emotional film. I mean, I don't think I've responded to a film like this ever. I mean, it's so disturbing and shocking, and I had to pause it a couple of times because I was just, I was just having a hard time taking it, which of course is the point. But I was so, now it took about 24. I watched it Wednesday. This is, here we are Friday. So it took about 24 hours for me to like get some of those images out of my head. I mean, and I wouldn't recommend anyone watch this with while you're having a snack or dinner or anything like that, because I mean I couldn't even eat for a day. I mean, and I woke up in the night, just like anyone, not for any particular bad reason, and as soon as I woke up, the images were just there. I mean, they're so disturbing and deeply emotional. So it's interesting how he manages to, at least in this film, because his early films are much more from the neorealist tradition. Not that those films don't require thought, but they're much more about the people and the relationships and those struggles. Whereas this, again, what he's getting at is not obvious, and it's easy to dismiss it. I mean, I've seen people say, "Oh, it's torture porn" and stuff like that, and it's easy to go that way. But this is Pasolini. He's not going to do something like that. I was curious, what was your first experience? When did you first see it? Do you remember your first time seeing it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually only saw it for the first time about a year ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
So yeah, we were saying before we started rolling that I teach Italian film classes, and I wanted to do a decent slot on Pasolini, and so I kind of thought I should finally get around to seeing it. I think probably like most people, I'd put it off seeing it because just because it is such a difficult film. And its reputation went before it, but I kind of felt, now was perhaps the time to do it. And so I think, like you, I, saw it over a couple, I don't think I sat and saw it all in one sitting. I think I sat and saw it in two, I had to kind of pause it partway through.
Right.
And I don't, my reaction wasn't quite as strong as yours. But I think I'd read such a lot about it and heard such a lot about it and probably seen clips that I kind of I was perhaps a little bit desensitized to it beforehand. But yeah, it's a very disturbing film. I feel like it's one of those. Yeah, I think it's a film I wouldn't recommend to anybody. Not that I would. Yeah, not that I would. Not that I think it's a good film, but I think most films. I think if I see something in them, I could kind of imagine a scenario where I might say to someone, "Oh, you should watch this," or or you might find this interesting. But I think it's so raw and full on and just unrelenting as well. I think one of the things that is so difficult about it is that it isn't just about the one scene. And lots of films have those one scene.
It's the whole movie. It's relentless.
And from 5 minutes in, you kind of know I've got another hour and a half plus of this, and it's just going to be the same and the same. And so
I know, God, yes, that was exactly my experience. But I know what you mean. Like I wouldn't easily recommend it, but like I would under certain circumstances, like if they were a Pasolini fan and just hadn't got into it yet, or if they just like the European art house cinema, who particularly at this time in the 70s, 60s, that they were doing a lot of filmmakers were doing these transgressive films that had to do with the war and stuff. So with certain people, I would probably say, but yeah, I wouldn't leniently suggest it.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. I mean, I think it's that's the thing. I think people that have an interest sooner or later, I think either you're curious about it or will or won't, make you confront it and watch it. But yeah, it's so that was my first experience anyway. It was and it was, as you say, I kind of knew bits of it and kind of pieced them together. But it's still, just
Was
it's just so kind of grinding, and it just kind
yeah,
of keeps going, and
it gets worse
and
and
doesn't.
worse. The
Yeah.
torture and everything. It gets worse and worse and worse. Was it any easier the second time? Like when knowing what to expect, or was it equally as
Uh,
hard?
I think it was about similar. It might, I mean, in some ways, it's possibly even slightly worse because there wasn't even the kind of novelty value of it. But yeah, I think probably about similar, but perhaps more grueling. But
right. I don't know if I could,
less shocking.
I don't know if I could do it again, but who knows? Who knows down the road? But I did think it was. I do think it's a great movie, certainly. And the more I read about it, what he was communicating, the more I could see its value more and more. What to you is this about? I mean, what do you think he was exploring here?
I think I'd probably go with the majority view that it's about kind of drawing parallels between fascism and consumerism, and
Right.
that it is a kind of a bit of a invective about that, really. And so yeah, there's enough. I mean, there's obviously the original work was written by de Sade in the 1800s. I think it was 1785.
Late
That
1700s.
he
Yeah.
wrote it, although it didn't get published, I think, until, was it 1904. And so he's kind of adapting that. And it's really interesting that he kind of, rather than bringing it right into the modern day, he kind of stops 30 years earlier. But there are just a few traces of kind of the modern day in there as well, that just kind of little clues that this isn't just a kind of a period piece. It is about a metaphor, and it's about more than that. And I mean, Pasolini had incredibly strong reactions against the whole kind of progress movement, I suppose. So in Italy, during the kind of the later 50s and the 60s, you get the kind of economic boom that's going on, and this kind of total transformation, really, of the nature of the country, and certainly as he saw it, the abandonment of the kind of old ways of life. And for a while, he saw the kind of the what he called the sub-proletariat, or the kind of the peasant farmers in the south, and also in Friuli. I never know how to pronounce that, but
yeah, you got it right. You got it right.
Did I? Oh, good. Where he used to come from, he kind of saw them as being the last kind of bastion of resistance to this progress movement that was killing this. He felt it was kind of killing the kind of the spirit, really, or the kind of the natural sense of the divine, we might call it, and yes, that was kind of getting squeezed out by this kind of economic progress and by consumerism. And his films kind of increasingly seem to try and kind of take on those things. I mean, even you obviously have a lot of stuff in the Gospel according to Matthew of kind of Jesus confronting some of that stuff directly.
Yes.
But from then on, it kind of gets more and more, and so particularly something like Teorema, where he's with Terence Stamp, where it's basically, I mean, I heard it described brilliantly on Twitter a while back as Terence Stamp man spreads and threatens to end capitalism or something.
Right.
But it's but yeah, they're kind of really targeting just consistently throughout his work, targeting consumerism and the kind of the capitalist world, really. And there's this sense with him, I think, that he is losing. He's not only losing the battle, but he's also losing traction in it. And he goes through a bit of a phase of trying to kind of produce these more historic works that are kind of more set in this kind of mythical past that he sees. And so we get the Canterbury Tales and the Thousand Arabian Nights and the Decamerone. And so these are kind of looking back to, taking quite a kind of nostalgic look back to this kind of past period and trying to kind of enthuse people about that. But he very soon after completing the final film of those, he basically dissed the whole lot. He rejected the whole lot and kind of thought it'd just been naive. And so here he kind of seems to tackle things a bit more on very extreme metaphor about what the kind of capitalist world is doing to young people, and obviously we kind of have the tragedy of the fact that he died even before it had been released after the film.
Yes,
and so
brutally murdered.
Yeah, and so almost. I mean, some people kind of say, well, how else could his life have ended from that? But then at the same time, we don't know what he would have done next. Would it have gone even more darker, or would it perhaps have been something a bit, been a bit lighter, or what would have happened? And so,
well, he was planning a trilogy, like what he was going to call, like, I don't know if he was going to call it this, or if it was just coined like the trilogy of death. So like there was going to be two more. I don't know if they were going to. I guess they'd be kind of similar to this, whereas like before the trilogy of life, like you were talking about, Decameron, Arabian Nights, and Canterbury Tales, which are
very life affirming, those films, I think.
Yes.
And the contrast, particularly, I think, between the kind of sex in those films and the kind of the almost the innocence with which it's portrayed is very. I mean, it's a very un-Hollywood portrayal of sex in those films.
Oh God, yeah.
And I guess that was one of his things, was he saw that the kind of commoditization of sex is a huge theme, obviously, in Salo, and so he kind of ends up going into this much darker take on it. Really.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just looked up some things he said, which you were getting at there, because he said he felt that television, like you said, television was the main agent of decline. He wrote in 1966, the concrete expression of the petty bourgeois nature of the Italian state, the repository of every vulgarity and of the hatred for reality. And then he went on to say he saw this as cultural genocide. And he said genocide is this adaptation to the power of Italian consumerism. He stated in 1974, this power is violently tearing away at ancient ways of life, at the age-old values that are really at the source of Italian culture as a whole. It is imposing its own models and values and destroying in the process a way of life. Which, I mean, a strong, to call it like a cultural genocide. I mean, it's really interesting. Like he saw, and I don't disagree with him. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, do I think it's as extreme as cultural genocide? I don't know about that, but it is interesting to see how furious this made him. And you feel that in this film. I mean, it is so, it's so cold. I mean, there isn't there's like you were saying, like there isn't even a moment of relief for the audience. I mean, it's like it's 2 hours of relentless torture. There's only a couple of moments where two of the young women at a certain point are hugging, or they're saying, oh, I don't know how much longer I can do this, and there's a feel of sort of at least they had each other kind of thing. I mean, there was a sort of, there was the only time I saw any kind of like, genuine interaction. Other than that, it was just these libertines, these fascists, absolutely destroying these people in every way, shape, and form. And I think, because for me, I think it's a mistake to look at anything sort of, realistically, because I mean, they're all sort of like, the characters are just kind of like archetypes, and like, even the young people, we don't know anything about them. They're just the young people and this experience, these bodies, right? And these experiences that they're having. Because I was even, sort of leaning into, well, maybe like the prostitutes, for example, who tell in the circle of orgy every night, they tell these stories which are inspiring the fascists of what to do with all these young people, these various sexual, rapes and tortures and stuff. And I thought, the fact that they're saying it like a fairy tale almost, like they're just like, they're saying it so casually. I thought, okay, well, maybe this is a way to cope. They're coping with what they went through. And so they're looking at it from almost like it was a good thing. But I don't know. I don't think it's necessary to go down that route. I think it's nothing. It's a fantasy, right? It's just, he's getting at, it's almost a political satire, really. I mean, he's getting at something that is a metaphorical experience. And then at the same time being so relentlessly emotional. I don't know how you felt. I don't think there is really any need to kind of look at anything that way. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it doesn't. I mean, in some ways, it's very, very stark and full on. In other ways, it doesn't kind of give you all the answers,
right,
about what's going on with him. And so, it is a film. I mean, again, this is why I like it, because it does make you have to think about stuff and try and work out and get to the core of what he's saying and how it works out. I think it was really interesting. You were just saying there about the sex workers in the film and how they kind of tell their stories. And one of the things I really picked up this time around was how young they were in a lot of the stories they told. A lot of their first stories. I mean,
she said one of them, she was like, oh, I was 7. And I was like, what? And, talking about being raped and all this with this 50-year-old man, I thought, holy crap. I thought, wow, that's an interesting choice.
I know. I found that, really, I found that particularly fascinating and insightful this time around, because I think so much of, naturally, I suppose there's a lot of focus within the film about the 4 kind of libertines and the 4 kind of fascist characters, and because they're obviously the driving force behind everything, but also the 4 sex workers are hugely culpable as well, and in terms of what's happening. And obviously one of them at the end goes and just commits suicide and realizes the kind of horror of it all.
Yes.
But you have this, but I think I just to focus on their characters, about how the fact that this was stuff that happened, horrific stuff that happened to them when they were younger, and that had then kind of become, they'd then normalized, and there's a lot of truth in those patterns.
I suppose he was getting
kind of patterns of abuse getting passed on.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I was thinking. You could also interpret it as sort of like it's conforming, like that they conform to these rules of these fascists, which you could also say about the soldiers that get hired at the beginning. And they're actually forced to work for them. And it's interesting because a lot of them at first seem apathetic to what's going on. They're just they're almost sympathetic, when they spit in the women's face at the beginning, and they bring them in, and then the libertines decide that, okay, who's going to marry who, and this kind of thing. And they say, well, one of them says something along the lines of, we don't want to do this. But then as the film progresses, when you look at them in their background, they're suddenly jumping in, and they look to be enjoying this, and they conformed, which you particularly see at the end, when, you know, the worst, the hardest, probably to me anyways, the hardest part it's scene is to watch the torture and murder at the end through the binoculars, the POV of the people watching from the castle, you know, in that little safe distance. And they're making jokes with the soldiers, and the soldiers are joining in and laughing, and they're talking about their you know, we're, you know, go see my girlfriend later, and it all becomes normal, right? So I wonder, you know, if he's getting at something in terms of a pattern of abuse, or a combination of that, or, you know, just like it's pretty bleak, right? It's like either you die or you conform in order to survive in this world.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly seems to be a thing about the kind of, I mean, to kind of quote a line from Magnolia, but about the kind of the sins of the fathers. I mean, I suppose, you know, biblical originally, but being passed down, and there's a couple of instances of that we see. So we've already talked about the sex workers being, you know, abused as children.
Yes.
But we also have one of the early scenes is the scenes of the four libertines marrying off their own daughters.
Yes.
You know, and those young women are kind of front and center in terms of the abuse that's dealt out. They, you know, right from the start, they're ordered to kind of be naked and to have sex with these, you know, their dad's friends, and to, you know, to be naked throughout the whole film. And some of them get the worst punishments. I mean, in the bit where the one of them eats something with I can't remember what it was. You know, something sharp in it that.
Because they put nails in the food.
Yeah.
That was another scene where they basically forced them to act like dogs.
Yeah.
And then I guess they were giving them dog food, it looked like. And then he gives one of them, I don't know what it was. I mean, looks like some kind of dessert, and then the blood coming out of her mouth, and you're like, ooh. And I presume it's something sharp in it, nail or something.
But so this is, you know, right, is this whole, you know, this whole kind of thing about the kind of stuff being passed down the generations, and just the kind of abuse, you know. And on the one hand, it just marks out those four characters, their levels of depravity, but it also just kind of emphasizes that I guess the nation doing these terrible things to their own children, as well as to
that's a good point,
the children of the nation. And so so that's quite a kind of poignant thing to it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good. I actually forgot that some of those people were those young girls at the beginning. So they're like literally the daughters of these people doing all this abuse, and then they're not just watching; they also have to be abused and tortured and raped and everything. I also thought it was interesting that he, you know, because when they talk about the rules at the beginning, the rules of the house and everything, one of the rules was something along the lines of you're not allowed to talk about religion or pray or anything. And yet they had religious statues in the castle and I thought I took that as a way to mock them, or to say, you know, almost like, you know, these people you're praying for, they're not going to do anything to help you. And one of the women, you know, because throughout the film, anyone who broke a rule, they would say you'll lose a limb if you break a rule. So one of the girls who you see early in the film who tries to run, I believe she was one of the first that got killed, because you see her, they open this, it looks like a sub closet or something, and she falls out, and, you know, her throat was slashed, and there's an image of Mary right in there. And I thought, you know, if the rules were that you can't talk about religion, what are the reason that they have these statues in there? I took it as a way to mock them,
taunting them.
I don't know if that was anything, if you had any thought to that.
Well, I mean, I hadn't picked up on that, but I think that I do find the whole architecture of the house that they're in, you know, just the way that is kind of used, is really interesting, because you kind of, I mean, you come from from 1001 Arabian Nights, Florida Melia, where the architecture is just stunning and warming and life affirming, and almost this kind of character in itself. And all the kind of buildings there, there's just a real warmth to them. It's just it's an incredibly beautiful film from that angle. And then you get to Salo, which is full of this kind of 1920s, very stylish kind of 20s, 30s type architecture. And yet somehow it just feels incredibly oppressive.
Yeah, it's so cold.
Yeah, it's really cold, and the way, just the way it's kind of shot. Partly it's about the lighting, partly it's about the camera, which is very, very static.
Yes,
through many of the scenes, and the kind of just the framing, but the whole thing feels like, again, the architecture, the building is part, and the kind of surroundings and the environs of the place is a character in itself again.
Yes,
and at this time it has, rather than having the kind of life affirming personality of the buildings in Fiori d'Amelia, it's got this oppressive character that is feels like it is closing it, the walls closing and people restricted by the space and the kind of strong lines of it, and just the whole thing. It's just horrible just from that angle alone.
Yes, it certainly is. And the four parts of the film, so we have like the anti-inferno, the circle of orgies, because in the film, or maybe it was the translation I had, it said circle of, I guess it depends on the translation, because it says here online circle of manias, the circle of shit, and the circle of blood. I remember once I saw the screenshot of circle of shit, I thought this could only mean one thing. And then once that was over, that's probably when I paused it for a second, and then it said circle of blood. I thought, oh my god. But the that it's interesting because for me anyways, I'm always very interested in psychology and motives, and this is another thing where I thought, I don't know how useful it is to think about why these men are doing this, other than he is satirizing the fascist and consumer culture and this need to feed. And I just thought it was interesting, because I thought, did these people, like we're talking with the prostitutes, like they had these horrible experiences, so now they have normalized it. But I think in their case, if there is anything to kind of lean into with these like caricatures, is the need for power. I mean, at all costs, and that I think this is true. I mean, it would be interesting to see what Pasolini would think of the world now. I mean, these things that he hated have gotten only worse and worse and worse.
And he is a character, and is almost as an icon, has been co-opted into that. Now, if you go to Italy today, and not just Italy, but you can get Pasolini T-shirts and Pasolini on tote bags, and numerous kind of like coffee table type books, and he's become a kind of commodity that has and a brand almost that is co-opted across the political spectrum, which is interesting for someone who never really fitted. I mean, politically,
it's ironic.
He was politically, he was always very much to the left, but he never really fitted with the Pici, the Italian Communist Party. He was always at loggerheads with them, or frequently at loggerheads with them, and took positions at times, quite unusual to what you'd expect. So, for example, in 1968, where you get the kind of uprisings across Europe and a lot of kind of Marxist type gatherings and riots, and there are riots in Italy about this, that he was actually annoyed at the kind of students, the kind of communist leaning sympathetic students, because they were attacking the police who were proletariat, and that was his kind of reading, and that's that's not at all a kind of a left.
No, not at all.
Well, I mean, it is it is a left wing, but it's not what you would expect to think.
Right.
You kind of see his logic, but he's just, while he was alive, he was so difficult to pigeonhole,
Yes,
And
yes,
it
yes.
is, I think he would be horrified about the way that he is now, elements of it are being kind of, carved off and taken
Oh,
to mean other things. And
yeah.
yeah, and I mean, his political outlook. I mean, I kind of find myself, I'm kind of fascinated by Marxists, but I'm not at all Marxist in my own politics. But how a lot of the and I'm probably fairly typical of people that enjoy his films and are challenged by his cinema and kind of find him interesting, but don't align with his politics. So so that's very interesting. And you mentioned just then about the four kind of cycles, and I think it's worth just talking about briefly, just talking about the kind of link with Dante there.
Yes, yes.
And how I mean, obviously Dante is the kind of seven cycles, but the kind of
Yeah,
the
it was
kind of
inspired by
circles of hell. Yeah,
Dante's Divine Comedy.
yeah.
Is that from? I've never read is that from
Inferno.
Inferno?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, because
yeah.
I mean I know of it, of course, but I've never. So yeah, because this is loosely on that as well, or at least the structure, I believe.
Yeah. That kind of that structure is
Right.
kind of taken, I guess, from Dante's structure. And obviously I mean, again, this is a kind of hellish situation that people are being put in, and things kind of getting gradually kind of a kind of downward spiral, as well as circular spirals
Right.
going down in terms of what's happening. And I suppose bringing in that that kind of, or as things kind of get deeper, they're getting worse and less likely to escape the scenario.
Right.
And so yes, that just adds a kind of whole other level of meaning. I just thought I'd chuck that in while we were going past.
Well, no, yeah, certainly. Well, it's interesting because I kept thinking, why are they, it's okay. The torturing of people, is something that you can lean into. What may be motivating something like that, but again, thinking of this realistically, I don't think is necessary. I think it's more that it's interesting because he portrays them as being impotent, and for him, like I had read, like it's because these people who need so much power. For him, it was ultimately because they're so weak and they can't even get an erection without hearing all these crazy stories from these prostitutes of and the things that get them off are like are rape and torture, and of course later on eating this will be great for Google YouTube AdSense friendly content is the eating shit that we saw, and more and more and more that they have to feed. It's because they're ultimately sick and twisted, and of course that goes into the fascists where if you didn't think like them, you were killed. You were not allowed to have free thought. You had to go by their rules, be ruled over them, that dictatorship. And so it just sort of gives you just a little taste of what something life like that would be like under these dictators. And you look at that now, like for example, the strike that recently ended with the writers strike and the SAG strike in America, and you see like some of these CEOs saying, well, the writers, these people are asking for too much, whereas these people like at the top are making 70,000 a day, and they claim poverty and stuff. And it's this sickness, it's this need to have more and more and more, and never thinking that you have enough. And I think it is some, that would be a whole other film to explore that psychology. But I think that's what he was getting at with these guys.
That's definitely in the mix. Yeah,
for sure.
That kind of insatiability and the power.
Yeah, it's absolutely nothing is enough, and the only thing these guys get off on is this torture. And of course, like we said earlier, like he's criticizing what because he thought a lot of the television people were watching was just shit and not just brainless and people who hated reality. And so if you look at all this, these are all shows, right? Like it's like they're watching a show.
Well, particularly that final scene of the murders, they literally
They're watching from the
down
distance.
in seats. They're looking over the balcony. They've got the
binoculars.
The binoculars, but they reverse the binoculars to kind of distance themselves from what's happening.
Which was a brilliant choice. The POV, like it's a show, it's TV for them.
It's
interesting.
Criticizing of that kind of industry. And we kind of get, I mean, there's just so many different things in it like that kind of, that take apart some of these modern areas of life. I mean, another one is the role of the four characters. So, you have the bishop and you have the duke and the magistrate or the judge and the kind of the president stroke banker. And so you've kind of got the main pillars of society there, and that, you've got the kind of the church, you've got the monarchy, you've got the judiciary, and you've got the kind of business and political spheres as well. And so, I mean, that's a kind of very obvious, I suppose, metaphor of the kind of the establishment, as we talk about over here a lot, and the kind of the establishment that kind of runs things. And so so that's another one of these metaphors that's very up and center. But I think also we haven't kind of talked much about the actual kind of Republic of Salo, or the Italian Social Republic, which might be kind of interest for people, because it's not something I grew up learning about, and it's quite a kind of complicated situation, really. So essentially, at the end, kind of getting towards the end of the Second World War, Mussolini had sided with Nazi Germany, but eventually, when the Allies invaded into Sicily, the king of Italy basically then deposed Mussolini and said, he's and basically sacked him, which he didn't take kindly to, and so instantly you get the Germans sweeping down in from the north and kind of taking hold of part of the northern part of Italy. You have as a kind of anti-monarchy fascist state, you have a kind of monarchist bit of fascism around Rome still, and there's the kind of civil war going on between the fascists and the kind of what's the word? I want to say revolutionaries, but it's not quite right. It's just escaped me.
The general
partisans, anyway. The Italian resistance movement. Sorry, I came back to it eventually. Funny what your brain does, isn't it?
That's okay.
And so, so you've got this kind of civil war, but you've essentially in the north, which is in what became known as Republic of Salo, in kind of convenient stuff, you have Mussolini propped up by the Germans. He's kind of got this power, but he's only really got the power because he's German backed.
Yeah, because it was like a puppet government, right? It was run, because it says from 43 to 45, Salo was the seat of Mussolini's Italian Social Republic, or Republic of Salo, a puppet government run by the Nazis in the northern half of Italy.
Yeah. So they kind of gave him his legitimacy, but for Pasolini, it's a personal connection as well, because his brother was killed by the fascists in this region at this time, and so I think I mean, that clearly seems to be an element of what really drives his kind of fury in this situation. But and so, I mean, as we said, it works on at least three different levels. You've got the modern parallels, or to Pasolini modern parallels. You've got the kind of fascist era parallels, which are more front and center, and then you've obviously got the kind of work of de Sade and his kind of ideas underneath it as well. But but it's taking, I mean, it's kind of taking perhaps two of his greatest furies, the decline of society into near capitalism, and the kind of murder of his brother, and kind of putting them together.
Yes. That's from everything I was gathering about it, that's very much what I felt as well. And one thing that, again, I was like, when they get to the circle of shit part, I can't believe I've been saying that, circle of shit, the circle of shit part, and I thought, well, why do all the why do the guys at the Libertines, why do they even want to eat all this shit? And you see them, it gets served and everyone's eating it, and then there's like this mock marriage between one of the guys there and one of the young men and one of the Libertines there, and they're all eating this, and I thought, okay, other than thinking that they're just sick and twisted, what, like we were talking about with consumerism, again, it's the thing about fast food, right? It's the eating shit. So of course this is their appetite.
Yeah.
So now, it's funny. I can see more and more of the humor of it, because I ran into, many years ago, I ran into a friend of mine and we were talking about Pasolini. He's like, well, have you seen Salo? And I said, I can't bring myself to watch it. He goes, no, it's funny. And I remember as I was watching the film, I thought, how can anyone think this is funny? But then the more you kind of think about it and read what he was getting at, it's like, yeah, there is something, there is actually something funny about that. And for anyone who's wondering how they did that, the actors were actually eating chocolate pudding, thank God.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. One of the things, I mean, it said quite a bit about the film, but for such a a serious and disturbing topic, the accounts from the people that were involved in it, the actual young people making they
had a great time.
Had a great time. Yeah, and said, it was a great kind of collegiate atmosphere going on set. There was really, well, yeah, I know. I mean, you kind of wonder. I do wonder, was that the experience of everyone looking back, or just a few that were vocal about it? But there was even I think Bertolucci was filming Novecento in a similar place at a similar time, and they ended up having a football match. Salo versus Novecento.
That would have been something to see.
But just that that whole kind of cheery atmosphere off site in between the cuts, and so it is. I mean, I think that was one of the things that probably helped me get through was knowing some of these things before I watched it, knowing the chocolate thing, knowing
exactly. Well, that's what
knowing the sense about it.
Exactly.
And I find I find when you're used to kind of approaching cinema as a kind of a product of something that is made and is a kind of project for someone. I mean, it's like my son's got a real kind of interest in horror, but he's
so does mine.
He's doing a lot of film stuff at art college, and so and doing kind of stuff like model making, all that kind of stuff. And so for him, it's always, when I was that age, I didn't watch much horror. Even the thought of it was a bit kind of beyond me, and partly think, but for him, it kind of feels like he's watching it. He's almost kind of watching it from a technical angle, and he's kind of and it kind of it does distance you a little bit. I think
it desensitizes the experience.
Because you kind of think, well, they are just eating chocolate.
Exactly.
But
well, it's interesting how your imagination can be triggered. I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes I even think, as an actor myself and someone who teaches, sometimes I'm always kind of, because you as an actor, you approach things, you make things as real for yourself as you can. And sometimes I do wonder, well, how, if we know that we're playing, but yet it can feel so real. And it's interesting how in a movie, even if that they're eating chocolate, but the context of the scene is that they're eating shit. And so that alone just puts the image in your head and it becomes so real. Because someone I work with where I work part-time, a big film buff, and he's like, just remember that is pudding. He's like, and it didn't work. I guess you gotta, I don't know. I mean, maybe if I see it again, but yeah, I was glad to hear that the time was mostly a happy one. And, it's interesting because he often, like a lot of the neorealists, he often used a mix of non-professionals and professional actors. And, sometimes I felt the performances from some of the people who weren't actors weren't very good, but I never minded because of the faces. I mean, he just finds these people that are you wouldn't find anywhere in a casting office, and they're just so perfect for the movies he tells that for me, I never mind if anything perhaps is a little mediocre or poor. But in this film, he got some incredible performances. I mean, because I was kind of looking like the woman who plays Vitima, she was the one whose mother had been killed, that they keep making fun of her when she was crying. And of course, she stands up to them at a certain point. And then, of course, that's when things go downhill for her. Her name is Ranata Moore, or Moore, I believe it's pronounced Moore. She was phenomenal. I mean, I don't know how she was only in one other film after that, but how he got, because they had to go to these emotional places that are so raw and deep, and even a professional actor would, I think, I think that would be challenging. I don't know how he did that, how he managed, but I don't know how you felt generally about the acting overall.
Yeah, I mean, it is almost a surprise that it is, there are kind of quite a lot of non-professionals in there, because they are, it just kind of gels together, as you say, and particularly, I mean, particularly the young people, you never kind of
exactly,
I mean, I've not even really kind of fully thought. I've thought a bit more about the four kind of fascist men, but not really kind of thought about the kind of non-professionality of the younger people, because you never for a second doubt that they are where they are. There's things. I mean, much as I love Evangelo Secondo Matteo, there are scenes in there where they kind of, for a moment, they take you out of things, which perhaps is the point. I don't know, but you kind of. Whereas in this, I never was kind of like never kind of allowed the relief of kind of seeing glimpses of that.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
And I mean, of the four main leads, I think one of them was a professional.
Because one I'm looking at Paolo Bonicelli. He's got 125 credits. So
and some really good ones in there. So I mean, he started making films in 1961. He did. I mean, he later starred in one of the versions of Caligula, which is perhaps a little bit of typecasting there. But he was in.
Once you do this, you're going down a dark road.
but he was in Genocide. He was in Mission Impossible 3.
Oh wow!
Genocide is a Roberto Benigni film. For viewers that aren't familiar with that, he was in Ciao Professor. Get my teeth in. Ciao.
Oh yeah,
Professore.
Lina
Wertmuller film. He was in Liliana Cavani's Francesco. He was in Roberto Rossellini's Year One. He was in the film Christ Stopped at Eboli. He really had some great roles and did a lot of stuff. One of the other, he's the guy with the beard. One of the other characters did a little bit, but they kind of went on from this. So the guy that plays the president, Aldo Valetti. So he was in Seven Beauties with Lina Wertmuller, which I think you've done somewhere else.
Yes, I thought I recognized him. Yeah, because I love that movie. So.
Yeah, I do as well. We should maybe do another Wertmuller film sometime.
Oh, for sure.
My favorite of his, he had 17 credits. My favorite one of his other ones was Frankenstein Italian style.
I have not seen that.
I haven't seen it either, but it's a kind of perfect kind of, the name is just that perfect kind of. I was literally last night was running an Italian class at my local cinema, and we were just talking about genre films, and it's perhaps the most perfect genre film title I can think of, because it's kind of it's pulling on that divorce Italian style and marriage Italian style tradition in the Commedia Italiana. It's also pulling on the kind of horror elements and elements. There aren't many kind of Frankenstein horror films in Italian cinema, but obviously American and British films at that time. Just as the title, I kind of almost felt, I want to see that, just because it's so.
I have not heard of that one.
No, I hadn't either, but it just I laughed out loud when I came across that. But the other two characters, the bishop and the magistrate, were not actors at all. The bishop, who's the guy that gets in the kind of elaborate headdress for the kind of weddings.
Yes.
He was a friend of Pier Paolo Pasolini's. He was originally actually going to play Acatone. Before Franco Citti got involved, but didn't, and kind of went on to be a kind of clothes trader. That was his kind of thing. And the magistrate was played by Uberto Paolo Quintavalle, which is his only credit, but he was a kind of novelist. He was a journalist. He was kind of a friend of Pier Paolo Pasolini's, and kind of was one of the knew about it before most people had known about it. And so, and that was something Pasolini quite often did. He quite often cast his own friends in in these kind of negative roles, and it's I mean, he does that quite a bit in Gospel According to Matthew as well. And there's something, I mean, there's a kind of there's a level of kind of, I don't know what extent Pasolini really liked himself. I think you kind of see a lot of these things coming through in his cinema. There's there's kind of criticism of all his friends and his way of life and who he is, and that he's not one of these kind of, that he is a kind of middle class character rather than one of these in touch with the kind of deeper spirituality peasant types.
Right.
And also I think the fact he was a homosexual himself, possibly, and potentially some of the the nature of a lot of the acts in this film are acts that are typically associated with homosexual relationships, and so and so and so it's kind of there are kind of elements of kind of self-hatred in some of this stuff as well, but the performances of those four leads, they are very strong, and
they really are.
And I think almost there are maybe there are times you could sit down and say, well, maybe that isn't how a professional actor would do it, but almost that just adds to the weirdness of it. I mean, particularly the kind of banker character. He's just a very, he's just, even if you saw him outside of the context of that film, you would know he was kind of quite odd. and the men themselves are so, I mean, talking about the kind of this, I mean, it feels like quite there's something kind of pathetic about the Republic of Salo. I mean, on the one hand, it was a awful I'm struggling to think of the right word. It wasn't quite a country, I suppose state. It's an awful state that inflicted horrendous suffering on the people around it. But also it was the kind of leftover of this supposedly, or perhaps once in its own, in Mussolini's mind anyway, supposedly great, glorious regime. And it ends up, it's now just got this tiny fraction of the country. It's propped up by a foreign government. It's beset by also, its own people are revolting against it, and all this kind of stuff. And these kind of supposedly untouchable, all powerful people are just these kind of pathetic. They would do well to, they're kind of people in middle management that have kind of, people are amazed they've got there and no one invites them to work socials. They're that kind of, if you set aside all the horrific acts, the men themselves are just so, there's just a kind of patheticness about it.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I was glad that he had, because I John Waters, this is a film he loves, and and I listened to an interview with him. He goes, there is some beauty in it. And I thought, again, I'm like, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
The more I thought about it, I thought, well, I don't know if this is what he saw, but some of the acts of defiance in it are quite inspiring. For example, the young man who sneaks off to sleep with the black maid at night. And of course, the others, a couple of the women, some of the women tell them, as they get caught breaking rules, they tell the libertines. And so they, because that was one of the rules, that you were not, men and women were not allowed to have sex with each other. It was one of the rules. And they find him. And of course, instead, it was so, to me, it really is probably the greatest image of the film, is the fact that he is not. When they put their guns up to him, and he's going to be killed. He's not afraid at all. And when he puts his fists up in the air and have an act of defiance, it looks them right in the eye before he's murdered. I thought, and I think that's probably what Pasolini was getting at, was like it's the people who say no, right? That ultimately are the most heroic. You could even interpret at the last scene, the young man who when they cut his eye out, again, graphic thing to hear, but right before they cut his eye out, he smiles at them. And I read some people interpreted more, well, maybe he had some kind of, he was doing that every now and then in the film with one of the libertines. And again, is that because he's trying to cope, perhaps, or he's trying to find a way out? I don't know, but I thought, it would be interesting. I don't think at that moment when that they're about to kill you, that you would smile. I thought, it's almost like spitting in their face. So I much prefer that interpretation. But he said here, I like this quote. He said, "The saints, the hermits, the intellectuals, the ones who shaped history are the ones who said no. This refusal should not be small or sensible, but large and total." So to me, those are if I would ever even to just watch some clips from this movie again, I would at least go to that scene where the guy's got his fist up, because that was, and you see that they're almost afraid when he does that. They're stuck there. They stop in their tracks, because they feed off fear, right? And so he was not afraid, and that's quite something.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole build up to that sequence is really striking, because you have the kind of I guess just that I think for a lot of the film there is a kind of sense of togetherness is not quite the right word, but it's the only one I've got coming. So between the kind of 9 boys and the 9 girls that are the kind of the victims, that they know they're all in this horrendous situation together, and there seems to be something about that, but that starts to break down in those other scenes, and people there's a kind of couple of betrayals of each other.
They start to rebel.
That are happening, and they start to say, and then they get caught, and their response to getting caught is, well, never mind me, what about them? Right, and some people get rewarded for that, and then they come in and they find the scene of as you say, the kind of the man with the maid. The maid is played by Ines Pellegrini, who is kind of has probably the key role. I mean, she's magnificent in
Arabian Nights.
Yeah, Arabian Nights. Yeah.
Right.
And so, but I think there's a kind of, I mean, there's been various transgressions of the rules, but there's almost kind of a transgression between the kind of servants in the house and that are being co-opted in some way to be there, and the kind of prisoners, and also I guess in terms of racial lines as well, things that would really have really rubbed the fascists nose, the kind of worst possible things from that angle.
That's a good point.
And then he, and then instead of, as you said, as you just said, instead of displaying fear with it, he displays almost kind of a aggressive courage of staying true to himself. And they actually, in contrast to all the others who they've kind of warned that if they, they've warned people before at this point in the film that if they break the rule, they break the rules, they try and get out of it. It's going to be, they're not going to let them off by killing them. They're gonna torture them.
Yes.
And make it terrible for them.
Yes.
But this
because they beg to get killed every now and then. They're just like, they're like, no, we'll decide when, or we'll kill you 1,000 times first. Yeah, they're just brutal.
Whereas his kind of rebellion so infuriates them.
Yes,
and they feel that so much need to reassert themselves that they just shoot him then and there, and he obviously
exactly.
So it is. Yeah, I mean, the most kind of, I think the most powerful image, or certainly the most powerful positive image in the film. There's not many of those. But,
Yeah, no, not many,
it's
but
also the least powerful
yeah,
positive image in the film, but
yes,
because it's the only one. But
yes, exactly. And another image that I know I touched on it already, where you see at the end, we see outside these torture of the worst kind before getting murdered, and the soldier and the libertines inside watching through the binoculars, and they're laughing, telling jokes. It's all normal. And there was another scene where again, viewers discretion is advised, where they're all forced to sit in this like tub of poo and shit, basically.
Yeah.
And one of the young women screams out, God, why have you, I believe she says, God, why have you forsaken us? Or why have you abandoned us? I believe. God, why have you abandoned? And then we keep hearing this noise, and I'm like, what is that? And then they pan over, and the two of the soldiers just playing cards, just like it's all like those people may as well just be taking a shower, and it's as normal as anything else. And again, I just thought, wow, I mean, this is, he's really getting at that these shows for everyone, or this background television, this is all just absolutely like as he put it, a genocide, so that was another image. And he even says here, this, where he talks about the book, the Sade's sadomasochism has a clear and specific purpose: the effect of what power does to the human body, the reduction of the human body to a commodity, the cancellation of another person's personality. I thought, wow, again, it's the more you read about his views and what he was getting at, that the more it, you see the artistic merit of the film, certainly.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I don't think I had anything else to add. Oh, the other thing I was, another example is when they do the who has the best butt competition, and and whoever wins the best bet is going to get killed, which is just a joke, because then as we see the character Franco, who wins, they're about to shoot him, and then they don't, so they're just toying with them and torturing them psychologically. And again, one can't help but think of beauty pageants, right? It's like, you put these people on display and look at them as products and judge, and who's the most beautiful, who's got the best body. There is something sick about that. And and I mean, I don't know if that was the metaphor there, but you can't I don't know if that was your impression.
It's not a link I've thought of before, but I do find it persuasive, actually, when you say it. I mean, there's just all kinds of little connections that just bring out some of these elements to it, and I think that's a good example.
Certainly. But again, it is, I think, if people who are on the fence on watching this, I would say if thematically speaking, these things interest you, I would watch it. And if not, but you like Pasolini, I think certainly, or Italian, this period where there were the, like the Night Porter, what's the word, the Wertmuller film, Seven Beauties, these transgressive films that explored World War II. And they like it is quite an interesting topic. So, I certainly suggest people watching it, but just, make sure you don't eat, and make sure you're on an empty stomach, and have a good time. Was there anything else you wanted to mention, Matt?
I'm sure there'll be things that come back to me later that I think, I forgot to mention that. But
there always is for me too.
I can't remember off the top of my head. So, I think I've covered most of it though. So.
Okay, fantastic. And if people want to follow your work, where's the best place for them to go?
Well, I've been at Matt Page on Twitter for a long time, but that kind of feels like I don't know. I'm kind of experimenting with Blue Sky at the moment, where I'm Matt Page Film. There's my book if people want to read about
yeah,
Bible
which is
films.
great. Really, I really enjoyed it, and I'll leave the link in the description box.
Oh yeah,
to the interview we did.
You might,
Matt and
yeah,
I.
you might also like be interested. Some of your viewers might be interested to know. I've done a commentary on the Gospel according to St. Matthew, so you can kind of, which is on YouTube.
Oh, great!
Link a bit, so you can kind of watch the film, and you can hear a bit of the sound. A bit like a director's commentary. I mean, I'm not a director. I'm just kind of making points about the thing.
Right.
Goes through. So
great.
So if that's something that interests you, then maybe you could drop that in as well.
Yeah, I'll leave the link in the description box for that, as well as where people can get your book and follow you on social media and your website. So great. Well, this was such a great chat, Matt. It was great to have you back.
Well, really appreciate you having me on. Really enjoyed it. It's always good to, I enjoy both of our chats now. So it's always nice to talk about these films, and I enjoy your channel even when I'm not on it. So,
fantastic. Great. Well, come again. We'll do another one sometime down the road.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be great.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. Patreon is exclusive content that I create month in and month out. And as a subscriber, you are able to vote on polls and contribute to what I do on Patreon month in and month out. So head over to the link for full details. You can also leave a donation directly to my YouTube channel by pressing the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on the thanks link and you can leave a donation there if you choose to. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner. To your top left in just a second, just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes. Also click the like button and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of this episode. Also, you can also share the episode. All of these things are what produce traction to my YouTube channel. So I appreciate you watching and thank you again. And I will see you in the next episode.